Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Margaret Sumney. We're going to go back to the US of A today, guys. Pack your bags, let's go. Sin and Tonic! Hi guys, how are we today? Feeling a little bit cold, but I will warm up, I'm sure. ASMR. I love that on ASMR. With today's case, it's a really weird one because I don't even know how I came across. This was not the case I was going to do, and it's not even on my list. It's not even on my list. And somehow, and I can't remember how I found it. It wasn't a suggestion. I must have just been looking at something else, and I don't know how I came across it, but I did, and I was like, what? Wow. I must have come across it because last week's case was in the USA. So perhaps in that research, this one, it must be that. But I just cannot remember. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I just don't like when I can't remember. Anyhow, it is an interesting case. So let's dive on in. Let's start today's case with Margaret. So Margaret was the youngest of 5 children. She had 3 sisters, 1 brother, and they all took part in an annual dance show. They would put this show on, and that was their family culture, dance. And the 3 sisters, or the 4 sisters, I believe, owned a dance studio together. So as they got older, that's what they did. So they were very talented dancers. And then they went on so they did their yearly show, which just looked lovely and cute. Very sort of, it was cute, like to put that on for for their community. And they did that into their adulthood. And then Margaret went on to have 2 daughters in her first marriage, and then she divorced that husband, and she then met David. And her and David went on to have a son called David Jr. Not the juniors again. Juniors and seniors. Oh my gosh, last week I was just so mixed up. I was like, who's who? David Sr. is the father, David Jr. the son. Her daughters were quite a lot older than him, I believe 14 years difference, age gap. And David was born in 1989, David Jr. Margaret was described as being very generous, kind, and she would do anything for her children. In particular, it was noted for David Jr. So that is a really nice way of putting it. Basically, people said that she spoiled him rotten, her and her husband. He was just a very spoiled kid. He wanted for nothing. And, that doesn't always bode well, does it? We've seen this before. It kind of sounds cute from the outside a little bit, doesn't it? Like, David Sr. would brag about his son any chance he could to anyone who would listen. And his mother they doted on him. They absolutely doted on him. And when you kind of read those words, you think, well, every child deserves love, unconditional love, attention from their parents, people that cheer them on, that are on their side. And it's hard to describe it, isn't it? But there's a line, and when you cross it, it's you're just like, you must have seen it. I've seen it in people and with their kids, and you just think, oh mate, like there's this line, and then it just tips over it, and they can normally, I think it's when they can do no wrong, when they can't see their children have a consequence for their actions. So they don't ever allow their child to have consequences or anything like that. They can't see them in any distress. It's horrible as a parent when your child is not happy. But sometimes, sometimes it is healthy to an extent, isn't it, for your children to have. And they have to build resilience, and we don't need to make it terrible for them on purpose, but these things happen naturally. But when it goes from having unconditional love and support and all of that to being icky and spoiled, is when natural consequences, I think that's what it is, isn't it? When the natural consequence of your action, when the parent sort of goes, no, and they take that all away, and that child never learns consequences for their actions, I guess. and they become very, what is that other word? There's so many words. They become entitled because you just give, and they never learn value of anything. Anyway, that's my take on that. At a very young age, David Jr. was already displaying some worrying behaviour. Some of it was understandable because of how he was being brought up. For example, very early on, he would ask for money and fully expect to get whatever he'd asked for. And that was as a young, child. And having kids myself, when they're learning the value of money, they might ask for, I don't know, they don't understand the concept of it and the value of something. So they might see something that's like £100 in a shop, toy. Why do they do that? Why are toys? Some toys are just crazy. And I'd like that. And you have to, it's a learning process, isn't it? But when a child is entitled, they get whatever they want. They don't learn that. They skip out that step. So they just like, I want, I get. So he was like that very early doors, which you can understand if that is how he's been raised. It doesn't make it right, but that was how he was being brought up. Also, at a young age, and this is like red flag serial killer central, he killed a bird with his own hands. Like he killed a bird. His sister remembers this and recounted it and just said that she came home to her mum screaming. Her mum was like quite distressed. Margaret was distressed. He didn't seem to show any remorse. He didn't understand that what he'd done was wrong. It is a red flag, isn't it, if your children are like killing small animals. Oh, that's terrifying to think that must happen sometimes. And you must just be like waiting, like, oh, how is this going to pan out? How is this going to pan out? Sleeping with one eye open. In 2001, after a few years of their marriage being quite strained, Margaret and David Sr. divorced, and it seems like it was quite messy, and David Jr. was in the middle of their divorce. I mean, he is golden boy. They both love this boy so much. They dote on him. They're anything for David. Margaret didn't do very well financially out of the divorce, which surprises me. But she didn't. She ended up having to close her dance studio. That's heartbreaking. In 2008, David Jr. goes to university in Washington, and his tuition and his accommodation is all paid for by David Sr. And then this is where it gets spicy, because I couldn't really find mention of anything in particular before this time. But in 2010, Margaret goes to visit David Jr. in Washington when he's at uni, and they end up in the hospital, and David Jr. has cuts to his arms. He's like slashed his arms, and his mother has a head injury. Now, she says to her other children that she's fallen down the stairs and that, oh, it's all a big coincidence and, whatever. And she covers up all the time. Again, another common thing with these spoiled children is that their parents will cover up. They can do no wrong. They are everything. They are golden, so they can do no wrong. It's such a damaging way to be. Yeah, it's sad, isn't it, when this happens? Because isn't it interesting, actually? That's just hit my mind. Sorry, tangent, kind of related. But when children are horribly abused and neglected and, like you hear some stories about serial killers and you just think, wow, some of these people have had just the most horrific, sorry, that was gross, horrific lives. They've had almost unimaginable pain and neglect and abuse and physical, mental, all of it, and you just think that it's awful. And then they commit heinous crimes. Not everyone, but some people, like, it's nature and nurture, isn't it? So they're abused, they have this horrible time, and then whatever, if they have a predisposition, can't think of that, you know what I mean, that can then, it can then lead to them doing these awful, horrible crimes. It doesn't excuse it, but you can understand, it's so much pain and trauma. Hurt people sometimes, don't they? That's where that comes from. But then on the other end of that spectrum, you've got cases like this, and there are many cases like this, sadly, where a child has been... It's not love. It isn't love. I love my children just as much as Margaret loved David. I love, it's not love. But it's like, are they treated too well? I can't put it into words, but do you see what I mean? It's the opposite end of the spectrum, isn't it? Same outcome, sometimes. Sorry, I digressed. Let's continue with the case. David Jr. ended up being kicked out of school because he just wasn't going to classes. And that makes sense, doesn't it? He has no accountability, responsibility, consequences. So what would you expect? And he was kicked out of school. So he goes back to Pittsburg and he spends his time with his mum and his dad in their separate homes because they're separated now, divorced. And then this is bizarre behaviour. He told his mum, he lied a lot. He was lying about university. He was telling his parents that he was going to every lesson and then he got kicked out of school. So it's like, oh. And David Senior's paying for all that. Thank you very much. So he kicked out, but then he tells his mum that he's joined the Navy SEALs. Random. That's a weird lie, isn't it? That is a weird lie. Anyhow, he is 24 at this time and he is jacked. So he is spending all of his time working out. And honestly, it actually made me shudder when I saw pictures of him with his mum. When you know what happens, when I tell you shortly, it makes you shudder because he's this huge man and he totally takes advantage of that. In 2015, there is a dispute between David Sr. and David Jr. Something to do with a holiday that I read two different things in two different sources. One source said David Sr. was refusing to pay for David Jr.'s holiday. That sounds like something he would get cross about, isn't it? Have I said the names around the right way? David Sr. is refusing to pay for David Jr.'s holiday. And David Jr.'s response to that is to horrifically beat his father. This attack was so loud, so violent. There was screaming, and the neighbours could hear him being beaten. So they called the police, and the police had to come and break the door down and stop him. And it was so violent, and there was such horrible injuries that his father ended up being unable to walk. Now, in my head, is that not attempted murder? If they hadn't come in and stopped him, I think he would have killed his father. David Jr. was arrested, but then he was released on bail because somebody posted his bail, a friend. And I just can't even with that. His father had to go and live in a nursing home because he needed to be taken care of because he was so badly beaten. And then he's released like that. To me, at that point, that is a very dangerous person. What do I know? Moving on to November 2016, he then assaults his mother. After she was attacked, Margaret, fearing for her life, ran to a neighbour's house. She got out of the house and she called 911 from there. She then gave a police report about what had happened. Now, I think that in that moment she was terrified and she really believed that he was going to kill her. She was very scared. So that now I think, knowing how protective and like he can do no wrong, all of that, I believe that her fear for her life at that point must have been so strong that it overrode, I don't know if that's English, but we're going to go with it, her motherly, the way she was a mother, that was gone. She was just, I'm scared for my life, he needs to be arrested. And she gave a statement, and that statement outlined such a brutal attack. I'm just going to read off the injuries. She said that David had punched her in the face, punched her in all over her body. He'd squeezed her and hurt her ribs, and then he had choked her. So he had put his hands around her, and just awful, really scary. Like that is a proper brutal attack. In her statement, Margaret said that she really thought that he was going to kill her, but then just before he let go, he whispered to her, "I'll get you next time." That is terrifying. I think that I think she really thought that he was going to kill her, and I think that she really was scared that he was actually going to do it again. He was then sentenced to 8 to 16 months in jail, and Margaret visited him every day. And despite her horrific attacks, she pleaded with the police to drop the charges so that he wouldn't serve as long. She just, that sort of motherly instinct to do what she'd always done sort of crept back in, and she was like, oh. So she again tried to reduce the consequence for his actions. Can you imagine how angry he was with her? Can you imagine? This lad that gets everything he wants and blah, 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 and mummy and daddy, blah, blah, and then she actually has him put in jail. She called the police. Oh, wow. I bet he was angry. I bet she was visiting him every day, probably giving him loads of money and stuff to try and make it up. I'm really sorry. You can just imagine. I'm just guessing, but you can imagine from what their relationship was like. David Jr. said that he was suffering from alcoholism, and that is why he had attacked both of his parents. Also, this was not the only time this had happened. He'd attacked his mother before, and it probably happened so many more times than anyone was aware of, because she often probably did not call the police. And in other situations, she was always asking for leniency for him. So even when it wasn't herself, which I find that angers me. Because, okay, if you choose to be like me, okay, I don't want him, don't be too hard on him, please. But then when he's done, who are you to be jumping in and saying, oh, please be gentle with my son, when he's done something to somebody else? How about back off? Whoa, ninja. A former girlfriend, for example, he had imprisoned her for 3 days, tortured her. What the hell? He did this for 3 days in a hotel room in Atlantic City. I just can't. She said that he had strangled her, he had choked her, and he waterboarded her. And she was found by a bellboy when they hadn't checked out, when they said they were going to check out. And I think he saved her life, basically. And David Jr. fled. He fled. And it is a series of events that happened where it was lucky. Oh, don't you hate that? He was identified as the culprit, but he was gone. They had issued an attempted murder warrant for him. Finally. He still managed, though, to get on 2 or 3 planes and get himself back home to Pennsylvania, because they hadn't put his warrant for his arrest into the system. So he could just get on planes. They had made a mistake. A month later, he then brutally attacked somebody else. A driver, probably just got cross with that person. He attacked that person brutally. This time he was arrested, but they didn't notice, or it wasn't in the system again, I'm not sure, but it wasn't noticed that he had an attempted murder charge against him. They wanted, that was just, it was so incompetent. So that wasn't picked up on, and he was then, it was like he was given an assault charge or something like that. So much, he didn't get it. Can you tell it blows my mind? Oh. So he's got a parent that just continuously is like, please give him leniency, please give him leniency. It wasn't that bad. Don't throw the book at him. Constantly doing that. He's got a father who's got quite a bit of money, probably helping him out in ways as well. So he never really served or had proper consequences for the actions that he was taking. He nearly killed somebody, and he, through the incompetence of law enforcement, got away with that at that point. And just, when you're just like, oh my gosh, he's never seeing consequences for his actions, not proper ones, not what he deserved to have. And then his father died in 2018, which is awfully sad. He died in a nursing home. However, things picked up a little bit. So he's gone into rehab, David Jr., and then he's got himself a girlfriend, and things seem to be, from his mother's point of view, okay. She's like, oh, smooth sailing for a bit. And then he injures himself playing basketball, and this makes him very cross. And then he ends up splitting up with his girlfriend, who then goes on to say that he was controlling and aggressive. No shit, Sherlock. Nothing's really changed. He's still the aggressive monster that he is. And then on the 1st of September in 2019, Margaret's brother sadly passed away. So one of Margaret's sisters tries to ring Margaret to let her know this sad news, and she can't get hold of her. Margaret's sister contacts one of Margaret's daughters, Ellen, and says, I can't get hold of your mum, and tells her what's happened, and says, can you try and get hold of her as well? And her daughter rings Margaret, and she can't get hold of her either, but she does get hold of David Jr., who says that his mum is asleep, so call back later. Oh, okay. She calls back, she's still asleep. Calls back again, she's still asleep. At this point, she's like, is mum unwell? Because she shouldn't just be sleeping for like forever. Like, do you want to check her? Oh, it's fine, she's asleep. So the daughter then calls the police and asks the police to go to her mother's house to do a welfare check because she's worried about her mum, and it's clear that David Jr. is going to do F all about it. When the police go round to do their welfare check, they enter the property, they look around, they go upstairs, and they find the body of Margaret in the bath. She has been very, very badly beaten, and the autopsy would show her cause of death was blunt force trauma to her head and neck. On discovering the murder of her mother, Margaret's daughter calls David Jr., and before she's even said anything, he is suspicious 100,000%. He's like, I can't go through the death of another parent, or something like that. I haven't even said anything yet, mate. So she was like, he's killed my mum. He has killed mum. And she knew it. What a horrible thing, horrible moment to just know. And sometimes you do just know, don't you? She knew he had killed their mother. The police found blood in nearly every room of the house. There was trails of blood. There was bloody towels all over the place. Doesn't it just, even the crime scene is just entitled, spoiled brat behaviour. Like, he couldn't even, they found a saw as well, like outside the bathroom, I think, to suggest that he'd thought about sort of dismembering her body and hiding it, and, couldn't even be asked, didn't care. Just like left, I know this sounds weird to say, but just left a great big mess. Just tried a bit, too much hard work, isn't it? And it is hard work, isn't it? When you hear about cases where people have dismembered of the body, cleaned up the crime scene, and you think, whoa, and it takes a long time, a lot of energy, and it's a long time because they, to cover it up or to try to. And it just reeked of, of course, you had a little attempt to, too much hard work. Too much hard work for you spoiled brat. Emotions. Luckily, David wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed so he was still in communication with Ellen. He was suspect number one, but he didn't know that. And his sister did not tell him that. So she carried on as if, someone's broken into the house, I imagine, is probably what the story was. And then she started to discuss her uncle's funeral because her uncle had died, and that's why they were trying to get hold of Margaret. So she started to discuss this with David, and she was saying, I really think you should come to his funeral. He cared about you an awful lot. He loved you. You should come to his funeral. And he was, oh, yes, okay, I will. So she was in communication, like a double agent. She was in communication with the police and David, and he agreed to come to the funeral, and the police, of course, staked the funeral out. God, that's... Imagine that. I imagine they were very respectful of the funeral. As David was leaving the funeral, so the funeral happened, they all paid their respects, and as he was leaving, he was arrested. When they got to the police station, they searched David, and they found on his person, let me tell you, silver necklace, a gold bracelet, and 3 blank cheques that all belonged to Margaret. He had them on him. What were you going to do after the funeral? Go to a pawn shop? Like, what the deuce, that busy man? So he's got all these things on him, and he was then detained for theft because he's stolen those things. They then went to the hotel where he'd been sort of hiding out, and they found even more of Margaret's belongings there. They found a gun that was registered to Margaret, so he'd taken that. So she had bought a gun to protect herself. She was dubious about doing it, I believe, because... that thing where if you then have that weapon in your house, he's a big dude. all he's got to do is overpower her, take the gun, and he could have killed her. I mean, he did kill her anyway. It's just so sad. But she did get the gun. That was found at the hotel, along with designer handbags and purses and things like that. He also had her bank cards and more jewellery. So it's just so cold, isn't it? So cold and callous. I mean, basically, he's killed both his parents because his dad, I think, I might be wrong. Apologies if I am, but I think his dad basically died from the injuries that he caused, even though it was years after. He did not confess. He was like, no, innocent me. And then, as the trial investigation went on, they got a warrant to search, other areas, and they got his phone. They searched his phone. Honestly, again, like I say, not the sharpest tool in the shed. He really, that, what's the word I said earlier? Entitled, how entitled he is, and how, nothing, the lack of consequence, nothing ever happens to me. I truly believe that he thought he would just not get caught for it. Because this is what happens when you don't have consequences for your actions. Like, why would you? He's gotten away with so much that you can almost see it, can't you? Like, well, I'm like invincible. I won't get caught. And then they find his phone. And on his phone are 277 photographs of him killing his mother, basically, of her demise. There's photos of her. He's sadistic. This is a sadistic person. This is somebody that, like, he could have been a serial killer. For one, the lady, his girlfriend in that hotel room, she could have died. His dad, he could have, if he wasn't interrupted, he would have killed him. And his mother, that's 3 people. He would have just carried on. There is no doubt in my mind that he is a sadistic serial killer. That is what he is. Really, when you think about it, he is, isn't he? So, and all the red flags, from being a child, killing the bird and stuff like that. So, in these photographs, he's taken photos of his mother sitting on a sofa with a bloodied rag on her head. He's taken photos of her laying on the floor. So he's moving his mum around. He's beating her and killing her and moving her around and taking photos of it. That is sadistic. He took her into each bedroom and took photographs of her in each bedroom. He's just playing. It's like cat and mouse. It is so sick. And then he's got a selfie of him with her blood on his face. He had made some Google searches of how to get rid of body, how to clean up a crime scene, but he didn't bother with that. Too much hard work. The autopsy showed blunt force trauma to the head, to her neck. She also had lacerations to her head and face and body, multiple fractured ribs, and most, just devastatingly, a spinal injury. He broke her back so severely that she would have been paralysed from the waist down. It's just, he broke her and then he moved her around her home like she was a rag doll, all the while beating her and hurting her, and it was just a horrible sustained attack. And what's awful about the photos as well is that they show her alive and in distress. So they weren't all of her body. Some of the photos, they ranged from when she was still alive to going into after she had died. It's just, can you imagine seeing those? I think I didn't read whether her family were in the courtroom, but that's just awful. The photo, the selfie with blood all over his face, he's putting his thumb up. You can't even write this, can you? You can't make it up. He was charged with, let me look at the list. 1st-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, theft and robbery. And then the district attorney's office suggested a plea deal. And the family immediately, they rejected it. However, it didn't seem to matter because that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what he got. And he then pled guilty to 3rd-degree murder. So not 1st degree, but 3rd degree. It meant that the plea meant that all other charges against him were dropped. So he just pleaded guilty to the 3rd-degree murder, not the theft and all the other things. And his sentence was 40 years with a minimum of 20. So he could be out 20 years after he committed the crime. And that is so lenient. A minimum of 20 years. That is so, what is it with him? He is jammy, isn't he? Like is he like at the end of a rainbow or something? Like so lucky. I can't even. I just can't believe it. Because you could understand, like plea bargains and things, if they didn't have any evidence whatsoever that he had killed his mother, and there was no, the photos on his phone, for example, imagine that didn't exist, and there was no physical evidence that he was in the house, and it could have been a robber or whatever, because if they didn't have the phone stuff, I believe that, they probably... he lived there, so maybe they, his fingerprints would be over everything, wouldn't they? So you could understand maybe that if it had gone to trial without proper evidence, that he would be found innocent. So in that situation, you can understand a plea bargain, because they're like, he's still going to serve some time and blah, blah, blah. But in this case, it's like on his phone, he has taken, including a selfie, 277 pictures of his mother's death. And I just don't get it. I don't get sentencing sometimes. It blows my mind. Like last week's case, don't get it. In my opinion, he's incredibly dangerous. I just checked my notes, he'll be 51 if he comes out at that time. Also, there is a separate, or was, and I cannot find, if anyone knows in the US of A, let me know, but there's a separate conviction going on for the girlfriend, the ex-girlfriend. That was only 6 weeks before he killed his mother. So he'd waterboarded her, strangled her, and she believes the only reason that she survived is because someone came and knocked on the door, she got to run away. So the bellboy, because they hadn't checked out on time. So I don't know, I can't find, is that still in trial? Is that still going on? That trial for the ex-girlfriend? Because if that's the case, how will that work? If he gets, so he's got 20 years minimum for his killing his mum, but then if he is found guilty of attempted murder for this ex-girlfriend, hopefully, will that sentence be added on top? Can we do that? But I can't find everything that you look for. It talks about Margaret. So I'd like to know, when is that trial happening? I'm gonna do some more research. I'll do my own research. Sorry, asking you guys. But if you just happen to know, but I will look into it because I'm interested in that. I'll follow it and see what I can find out, and then I'll update a community post when I know. The family are incredibly peed at the plea deal. They're just like, what is that? And I would be too. It's awful. So they're not happy about that at all. And for that reason as well, I really hope that he does get another sentence and it's added on top, because 51 to come out of prison, if that happens, and you never know, guys, because he sounds like a right piece of work. Maybe he's going to get himself into some trouble in prison or something like that, because it sounds like he's the sort of person that might. Anyhow, I think that is all I have for you on today's story. I always feel fearful that I've missed something out, and last week, because my brain is a bit tired from Christmas holiday, I do apologise. Last week I have had so many technical issues. That's why I'm not filming with my green screen this week, because I'm scared and I don't know if I've sorted out the problem. So I thought, let's just, for my sanity, we'll just go bare bones up the shed. And what was the other issue? The other issue was I think I'm not complacent, but because we've been here for 3 years now, Sin and Tonic, and how beautiful is that? And I get on a roll, and I used to check my notes so much, but now I've researched the cases so much by the point I come here that they're in there and I don't have to look so much. However, last week, where I did that and I just was like, oh yeah, back to it, I missed out things. I skipped over things in my notes, and I didn't say parts of what I had written down. So that meant that I had a video where I had to put titles in to say, like, oh, because there were some crucial bits that that had not come out of my mouth. So I was like, well, I have to put that in there. So I really hope, if we have got to this point in the video and there isn't a title, like, words for you to read, we're doing all right, aren't we? Let's see. Oh gosh, when I edited that, I was just like, Sophie, come on, do better. Luckily for me, my beautiful sinners are all wonderful, lovely human beings who know that we are but human and that we all make mistakes. So I didn't feel too... But then when the old green screen and all that didn't work, I was just about ready to throw the laptop out the window. I hope you've had a wonderful week. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I'm going to love you and leave you because I think my fingers have gone numb. It's really cold up the shed. Nothing to report. It's all been quite normal and smooth sailing. And yeah, that's nice, isn't it? And I'm not having massive despair in January. I think it's because I have given myself some new ventures. And not dentures, ventures, and I've thrown myself into research and stuff, and I've just kept myself busy, and yeah, so I think that's really helped actually. I'm not feeling... If you are feeling really sad, just do as many things as you can that bring you joy, even small things. Sometimes I love having a coffee or a tea in one of my favourite mugs and just sitting in Granny's chair with the dog and just being peaceful. I love having a bath. I know that that's really cliche, like self-care, have a bath, but I do actually really love it. I have a bath every day. I like to meditate. All of these things, some people like to do a puzzle. Some people like to play games on their phone. All these things, but just do things that bring you peace, joy and contentment. Don't worry what anyone else is getting on with. Who cares? Got to do you. Got to make yourself all right. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Sin and Tonic. I hope you can join me next week for another true crime story and a glass or a vase or a jar of gin. I'll see you next week. Bye.